Well, thank you for coming back after such a short break. Our next guest is Thibault Cabanas. He is a UX designer. He formerly worked at Slowclap on Sifu for 4 years, and he is now freelance, working freelance. His presentation is about accessibility in challenging games.
Hello. Sorry for the inconvenience. Thank you very much for inviting me and being so nice. It's the first time I went to Angoulême, and it's good to have a break from Paris and talk about a subject with important to me. I'm lead senior UX UI designer. I work in user interface design for 15 years, and including 10 years in video game industries. The first game I worked on was a 3D casino game at MKO Games back in 2007. Then I made a location-based mobile game called Battle Paris that just turned 10 years old, and several other little games. And then I spent 3 years in a UX agency to properly learn the ropes of user experience before landing at Slowclap in 2018. First working on Absolver last DLC Downfall, and then Sifu from pre-production to most of the post-launch updates. So there will be 4 main parts for this presentation. First, accessibility for everybody, not just disabled people. Then I will develop the difference between challenge and difficulty, because that's not really the same. Thirdly, I will present what we did about accessibility on Sifu, how we did it and why. And finally, I will wrap up things with some good example and advice. First, accessibility is for everybody. You have nearly a quarter of persons with disability in the United States, and 1 in 5 in France, and that represent 400 million players with disabilities. At least that's what the Xbox website say. And so it's not something, it's not nothing, it's an important part of the population. This is a quote from Courtney Craven, who is founder of Can I Play That? And Courtney is both hard of hearing and chronically ill, and say while reviewing accessibility for Returnal, I play video games to alleviate the stress of having to sustain myself in an unstable environment. And when games add to that stress, I generally uninstall them and forget they exist until someone on the internet starts shouting about difficulty. And every second of her life as hard of hearing and chronically ill is about perseverance and overcoming barriers. And because of that, they have no desire to sustain that perseverance in their leisure time while gaming. So, there are a few examples, some examples of first accessibility settings for disabled people, but that turn out massive use for everybody. It was an improvement for anyone, and this is obviously Portal from 2007, 15 years ago, that had large legible font, dark background to insert contrast, caption for important sound feedback, here large wall panel movement, and the indication of who's speaking. And of course, there is maybe 6% of deaf or hard of hearing players, but truth is, it serves everybody, as, for example, 85% 95% of Facebook videos are played on mute, and I think you also watch a lot of videos either on YouTube or elsewhere without sound because you don't want to disturb anybody around you, or anyway you can't hear the video because you are in the subway or anywhere else on a very noisy environment, or maybe you don't want to wake up the person who is close to you when you are playing games. Next example is from Minecraft, where you can scale up the HUD like 2 times, make it very legible, and there is 5% or around 5% of blind or low vision people, but there is around 51 players on the half of the players who play on mobile device. That can be a console or a smartphone. So these options allow all kind of use, and we will see that we used it also for Sifu. And this is a game from 1996, Daggerfall, where it's, I don't know, 27 years ago. It really is full of bugs, but it asked what reflex you wanted the game to be, with a good explanation text. And even people with motor disabilities could nearly play the game, except for bugs. And this is Jérôme Dupierre. I think some of you may know him. He's a Cnam senior lecturer and accessibility consultant. We don't care if I play one-handed because of a motor disability or if I just want to hold my drink. It's a need of adjustment and comfort use. So this is another example why, in this case, motor accessibility options are a good thing for everybody, not just disabled people. Now about challenge and difficulty. This is Jan Hamilton, and it is a very important people in accessibility in game, a very strong advocate. He co-founded the Game Accessibility Conference and participate in the game accessibility guidelines, who are a very useful tool for every game developer. And he say games don't have difficulty. What games have is barriers. Difficulties spring into existence when people play the game. It's something player experience as a product of their personal capabilities versus the barriers that a game present. And this is why if you and I play the same game, one of us will find it easier than the other, because the level of difficulty experienced is relative to the person playing. And humans are a pretty varied bunch. Actually, nobody is the same as one another. So. And the most barriers are unnecessary and many are unintended. This is the importance of proper playtest, mostly. And this is Alana Pierce, writer at Santa Monica Studio, who worked on the last God of War. And people with disabilities are not asking to make game easy. This is a subject that came up regularly and that came up also with Sifu. They are asking to make it possible for them to play hard games too. And I think it's very interesting and quotes that say a lot of things. Not about making game easy. And this is a chart I borrowed to Aranok, YouTuber Aranok, on their video authorial intent difficulty settings are accessibility settings. So on the same challenge level, players will have very different experience. some players, maybe with disability, or maybe they are not used to this kind of games, will experience anxiety or maybe plain impossibility to play a game. The average player, and average doesn't really exist, but anyway, can experience the proper flow state that the dev wanted them to experience. And player C, with a very skilled player or very used to this kind of game, maybe will even have some boredom while playing this game. So when you say an easy game is not an interesting game, define easy more precisely. What's easy for someone can be a nightmare for another person. And Jan Hamilton also had games can't be balanced. They can be balanced to an individual, but they can be just balanced in general for everyone. So what really matters is the kind of experience that we want our player to have, and barriers prevent that experience. And accessibility exists to enable that vision. So with accessibility, and it can take very various forms, not just options, but we'll see, you have also different examples. You can enable all players to have the same intended experience. And so here I try to break down the challenge level for every aspect of Sifu, about every kind of abilities or disabilities. So Sifu is very heavy on motor disabilities, because you need a lot of reflex, and you have some commands, some inputs that can be complicated to press, and it can be somehow challenging on a cognitive level. Sorry for my English. And it's mainly because also of that, and that to follow the right path and know what the game wants the player to do. It can be challenging on a vision level, because it's a 3D games in narrow environments with a lot of enemies, and camera was a very complicated subject, and we worked really hard on the camera, trust me. It's still not perfect, but it's something we work really hard on. And for hearing, you don't have many gameplay elements that purely rely on sound. So you have a very dynamic music who adjusts to the flow of the game, and it's a pity if you cannot experience it. But anyway, and you have some dialogues, but it's not necessary to follow them to complete the game. This is for a fighting game, or it can be for a rhythm game, but a strategy game or a narrative game will have a very different chart. And if I take, for example, the motor challenge for Sifu, we can break it about 3 main subjects. It's accuracy, to aim what we want to select for fighting or for interacting with. Complexity, mainly of the inputs, and the reflex timing needed to accomplish some tasks. In Sifu, not every of these elements have the same difficulty. We have some auto-aiming that can mitigate the challenge for accuracy. We have a lot of a strong remapping system that allow to mitigate also the complexity of the input, and we have some options for the timing, but that's still after having watching a lot of people playing the game on YouTube or so on, I think that's the main challenge we put on our player. And even about the reflex, you have different things you can work on the game design or on the dev side anyway. You can have parry frames, character attack speed, enemy attack speed, and I may miss some. So even for that, for the reflex, I think character speed, it's not the main challenge to follow the attack of your character, but it's a little bit more of a challenge to follow, even more a challenge to follow enemy attack speed. And the power frame can be really tricky, even if it's a little bit forgiving, from what game designer told me on Sifu in respect of other beat them all or fighting games. But you can always have more granularity to work on it, and it's crucial to identify the challenge, the more where you put the more pressure on your players to find solutions to mitigate them for people who need it anyway. So if I take like for the example of the parry frames, let's say we have an attack with 3 frames to parry as a default settings. For player B, it will be the intended experience, as it will be quite challenging, but it's still in the flow state. But for player A with no experience of this kind of game, or who want to play this game but have some disabilities, it will be purely impossible to play the game. And I know a lot of them. And for player C, who are very experienced, and I've seen like some video game journalist, I don't know if it was jeuxvideo.com or I don't know which media, who just play flawlessly from the start and finished at 20 years old after a few hours of games. So for them, it was a very good game, but they didn't experience the challenge we wanted to put on the player. They didn't experience what we wanted them to experience, truth is. And they were the core target. So, and now how we did on Sifu, we had around 25 people at the start of the production. It was beginning of 2019, and we were more than 60 at the end of the 3 years of production. Half of the time were fully remote for everybody because of COVID, like Stray. We have kind of the same development cycle, so I think it's not a coincidence. And massive jackhammers noise when we were at the office, and that was really a challenge. And for UI design, for the tools, we mostly worked in Figma before integrating in Unreal Engine. I did most of the production along with someone with half at school and half at work with us. And at the end, the very end of the production, we hired an integrator, UI integrator, dedicated. And for the visual style, at first we wanted a more kung fu styled UI, but with the number and complexity of gameplay systems, we progressively switched to a more clean, modern UI to relieve the visual overload for the player. We had some basis about accessibility from Absolver in form of remapping, quite basic remapping, but still very helpful, and some gameplay options with invert camera, control sensitivity, and so on. One of my main tool for accessibility was this website, Game Accessibility Guidelines, made by a bunch of professionals from the industry and accessibility experts. And it's a gold mine, really. And they break down all of the accessibility solution you can bring to your game between basic. So if you don't have them, your game will be behind industry standards and not be comfortable to use even for people with no disabilities. You have intermediate solutions that show you that you make some efforts to enable disabled players to play your game. And you have advanced solutions, and there you are on the front line of accessibility and creating new features. So you have a lot of examples also of games for each solutions, and it's really interesting. And from this list, I made a huge spreadsheet with all the solutions, and this is not even half of the accessibility solution we considered. And you have the level, the field, the considerations of that main solution. But the most important column here is a colored one called integration, where we decided if we wanted to implement it with the help of the priority and workload columns just on the right. And it was a constant discussion between every department, and back and forth, and sometimes we wanted to include some solutions, but it wasn't pertinent for game in the end. And but there is, for example, there is solutions for multiplayers or mobile games that were not pertinent at all for games, and we had a very strong idea of what we wanted the player to experience. We oriented also the solution we integrated. So, but you have some lines grayed with bold text with required. So that's not a level of the game accessibility guidelines, but that's something I thought where we couldn't do without, in my opinion. And we integrated all of them. And you have the line just below, allow interface to be resized. And I made a little notes. We made little notes each time. And for this, it was done for the HUD, but not for the menu. We brought Jérôme Dupire from Cap Games and also the Cnam 3 times in the course of the production, first on mid-production to give us some advice and a quick training in our office about accessibility. He gave his early feedbacks, general advice, and he helped us prioritize. And he came back once at the 3/4 maybe, and then brought disabled playtester near the very end of the production. And about playtest, we playtested every 6 months in our office with external people. there were usually between 4 to 5 external people, and each time it was tremendously helpful. And even if the core gameplay was there nearly from the start, core concepts like depth and game loop were reworked several times during the production, and it was very important for us to have this kind of feedbacks. The UI playtest were the last to be done, unfortunately for me, in September for a February release. And this is one of the reasons we shipped with far too bright menus, but dark theme was on the first title update. And it was nearly the only complaint I could have read about the game interface, specifically, at launch, so I guess it wasn't bad. And we brought, or tried to bring, 2 people with impairment, one motor and one visual. The one with motor impairment, they were part of our core audience with a brawler adept, let's say, but unfortunately hasn't been able to come due to COVID situation. And the one with visual impairment wasn't part of our core audience, but still brought very valuable information for the game, for Sifu, but also for every games we could work on the future. This is an example of something we did that helped a lot for cognitive abilities. The detective board allowed us to provide a summary of progress. So you pick up items, and you can open a little pop-up with a text that explain a little bit of lore about the game. And also on the bottom left, you have 6 post-its who help for gameplay. It's gameplay informations. Because we had a lot of gameplay systems that we present to the players, and sometimes it could be overwhelming, so it allows a reminder of current objective and gameplay systems. And now this was for allowing the interface to be resized for the HUD. So I pushed the cursor to 2 times, so it's every element can be multiplied by 2 nearly without no overlapping. It was quite a challenge, especially on the technical side, because before Sifu I never integrated in Unreal, so it was a fire button for me, and it was very intensive and very interesting, but I really wanted to take care of it, and yeah, also you have subtitles with clear background and fonts that resize with the HUD. Why we didn't did it for the menus is because it was too complicated, honestly, and it wasn't worth the effort, we thought, because the main overload for the player is during gameplay. During gameplay, they don't have time to stop and read what's happening on the screen. So it's very important that this is sufficiently big enough. And in the menus, game is on pause, and you have all the time to read what you want. And usually, people with low vision use Windows embedded tool to magnify a part of the screen. It's the ideal solution would be to also have interface resize for the menus, but in our case it was clearly too much work. And we also added high contrast mode, similar to one on The Last of Us, and it's our dear VFX technical artist Raoul Desmarais, who integrated it as he was also the one who made the main shader for the render of the game, and he very kindly agreed to do it, and it's very important for low people, but potentially for many more people to read who is attacking you, what are the interactable elements. It's not really visible here, but you have the bottles on the back were in yellow, so if they are close to you, of course, you see them more clearer. But also the doors that are the main path in the game. It's rooms after rooms, so if you don't find your way in our environment, you can enable this option, and you will see a bright yellow door that points you to the next chapter of the game. And this is a remapping menu, and it was, I think, maybe this was the more complicated things to do for me, and also one of a huge charge for Thomas Ribou, my friend, senior dev, who worked on it and who developed it. And because we had a very rich and complex system input, a lot of commands to put, and we allowed the player to remap all of them and also make preset. So that was Romain, who was a game designer of the third level, who made all the presets, who worked on all the presets. If you cannot play with your right hand or your left hand, you have every main interaction, every main inputs who are on one side or the other, and also on top or bottom of the gamepad. And you have another very important accessibility option. It's the press type, because, for example, for the guard and deflect, you need to hold the guard only, and focus also. You need to hold the button, but if you have a very high constraint on your motor function for your fingers, some of your fingers, it can be really hard, and you have an option to toggle instead of holding the button. And we were very glad that it turned out well. We had a lot of good reviews. We had a lot of heavy discussions about the difficulty, and yeah, that was a subject that we had, of course, between us already before that. But the review that was more important for me was the "Can I play that?" accessibility review, and we got a 6.5 out of 10, and it's above average, and we were above Horizon Forbidden West, who got 5.5, and we were far more and with a lot of more budgets than us, with Sony backing them and etc. So it was quite crazy for me to realize that. But yeah, we had some, of course, a lot of cons also, like the precision of the input required. The difficulty include permadeath. It's the core gameplay of the game, so it's difficult to go without that. The remapping breaks some inputs, so that was clearly a bug. And at the time, that was quickly fixed. And no visual clues or target locking to help in combat. So yeah, we could have done some things with that, but we had, like everyone else, a limited time and budget. And one thing we also did, we did it at launch, but we updated post-launch. That's where this slide is right now. We include the means of practicing without failure with the training room that's accessible in the hub of the game. And but at first it was just a basic enemy, the grunt, and you could just activate aggressive or passive behavior. And after that, we made a huge update where you can unlock every archetype to fight against them and spawn multiple enemies. And for the bosses, have each phases of the bosses, but they appear only once you beat them once to don't spoil the discovery of the game, mainly. And of course, the heavy topic in the room. We released the difficulty level we released in February, and the difficulty levels appeared in May, and we of course had a lot of discussion. For us, it made sense to not include them in the release because we wanted to be clear what the proposition of the game was, and it was still here in the form of the disciple difficulty level, and we added the student difficulty level with it's the same gameplay but with one important modification to the core gameplay. It's the incremental death counter. Each time you die, it's supposed to be incremental, so the second time you die, you get older by 2 years, the third time by 3 years, etc. And we remove the incremental side for the easy setting. But you had the same enemies, numbers, and archetype. They were less aggressive and fight with simplified combos. And also a new challenging mode with more aggressivity and new combos for the more able and skilled players. And one also important game design choice was you can lower difficulty at the start of the game, of course, or in the hub between levels, but you can only increase difficulty by starting a new game. You can lower in the hub, but you cannot increase once the game is started to avoid all sorts of gameplay exploits. And you also need to finish the game once to unlock in Disciple to unlock the master difficulty. So to be sure that's really people who have already experienced the game as intended once, who played the most difficult level. At first I was glad that I added the difficulty levels so that more people could play the game we worked hard on, but no, I think it's kind of more of a convenience option than an accessibility one, in that it doesn't bring specific solution for a specific challenge that someone might be facing. That's a quote from Candid Games that I borrow because I think it perfectly nailed what I think of that afterward. And additionally, we added the modifiers to bring more granularity to the challenge and new accessibility options, such as slowing down enemies and attacks, or activate slow motion by pressing or toggling if you choose this option, so grab button. But just accessibility settings are unlocked by default. You don't need to buy them with the gold currency with added in the game, because now you have kind of objectives that you have to complete to be able to unlock more modifiers, but they are only available if you are in the student/easy difficulty. And also we were nominated for the Indie Excellence at the Game Accessibility Conference, and it was very important for me because that was something I worked mostly on. And but I wasn't alone. I had Sarah Manzaro, junior UI UX designer at the time, who assisted me on playtests and the input remapping with senior gameplay dev Thomas Ribou, Bastien Bellan, UI integrator, who single-handled the UI dark mode, and Raoul Desmarais for the great high contrast mode. So now it's how it should be done, but it's a silly phrasing, I think. It's a more takeaway recipe, I think. From most important early on to late development improvement, I think in-game solutions are the most elegant and efficient way to solve accessibility problems, but they need to be hammered right from the start. So the game designers really need to take this subject, have this subject in mind right from the start, and we have every production have various conditions about that, so you never know. But once you're working on the game, playtests, of course, are hyper important, and playtests with disabled players provide invaluable feedbacks that enhance the experience, not just for disabled people, but for everybody. And only then you should think of what accessibility option you need to add to your game. And finally, post-launch updates are a good late solution in some situations. Some example of in-game solutions: Zelda Breath of the Wild allow players who want a challenge to go straight to the castle, and other players to experiment and gather strengths by exploring the world at their own pace. But for players who want a challenge, they just can go straight, and it's not hidden, it's in the plain center of the map. And of course, Elden Ring, it's kind of the opposite. The game is very challenging by nature, but if you hit a wall somewhere, you can just go elsewhere. And also one mechanic which is very helpful is summoning spirits or friends to mitigate mostly the motor barriers that happen with those games. However, it still have a lot of unintentional barriers born from design choice, such as very small subtitles and interface text and elements. And in Super Mario Galaxy, another example, the game is mostly very forgiving, but players who want a real challenge will be crushed by this level when they want to find all hidden stars. I think it's this level is a Dark Souls game by itself. Another solution that we kind of implemented with the training room in Sekiro, you can train as you like with Unbase the Immortal. That was clearly an inspiration for us and bringing a nice narrative justification to the system. Big up to Leo, who single-handed the training room. Theo, sorry. So, yeah, playtest often, and if you can do it with disabled players from your core audience, it's really a blast. You can ask Jérôme and Capgame, and I'm sure there are other associations that can provide you this kind of service. it's fundamental to mainly monitor the challenge and the fun you gave to the players and gather valuable feedbacks. And bringing disabled players from your core experience, it will give you a magnifying glass of all the issues of your game with laser precision, not just for disabled people, but for everybody. And invaluable feedbacks that will help you build better games in the future. So I hope it will be very helpful for future game. All we had done in Sifu for future game at Slow Clap. And now it's accessibility options. Yeah, Celeste allow strong accessibility options with the assist mode. And one thing that they did that is often celebrated, and they are really transparent about what this is about. You have like 4 slides, but I think this one is more talking. So Celeste is intended to be a challenging and rewarding experience. If the default game proves inaccessible to you, we hope that you can still find that experience with assist mode. So the main aim of the game is to be really challenging and say something through this challenge. The same thing we did with Sifu, where we wanted to convey the spirit of Kung Fu, where you learn by practice, by repetition. And of course, one of the most celebrated examples also is The Last of Us has a shit ton of accessibility option, and they have the budget for that, and they crunched hard for that, and do not crush. Hopefully, we nearly didn't crush for Sifu, and that was very great. And thanks Edward Sananikone for our main producer for driving the boat this well. So this is navigation and traversals options for The Last of Us remake. And lastly, you can do post-launch updates, that can help communicate clearly the original intended experience, as I said earlier, but with the risk of letting some players on the side of the road at launch. That's a choice that you have to make, and it can be intentional or unintentional due to time constraint or not sufficient playtest or I don't know what. For example, Deathloop was the game of the year 2021, but had some mixed reviews about accessibility. But they made a huge title update about accessibility, and nearly all was forgiven for them. And it was a really great update from what I've heard. And the update took place on May 2022. Yeah. So one last word from Celeste devs. Everyone has their mountain to climb, and that's okay. That's all. And yeah, thanks a lot. And if you have any questions, I will be glad to hear them.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We have the time for 2-3 questions. You can raise your hand and we will bring you a microphone.
Thank you a lot for this talk. It was very interesting. I think it's a very important subject. So I had questions about the flow state that you mentioned, because I also think that it's a very interesting subject. During the Absolver or Sifu development, were you able to find ways to bring or maintain the flow state within the player's experience through the use of sound? And if so, were you able to confirm the reality of these ways through playtests? Thank you.
So the question is, it's through sound design, the flow state?
Through sound design or music, audio in general, were you able to find ways to bring or maintain the flow state within the player's experience?
I think Lorian and Lucas could talk better about it this afternoon about it, but yeah, of course, specifically about the flow state, it was very important, an important subject, and Lucas was very aware of it and had a lot of discussion with Jordan Layani, who is the creative director of Sifu. And they talked a lot about that, about the sound effect and the ambience, because ambience mood, the mood of the game of each level was very important, and how to convey that to the player. And there was also one very important thing with the soundtrack made by O'Willy, with a very dynamic soundtrack, who evolve with the state of the game. If you are in combat, or you have the music plays accordingly to your fight, and it's I think it really helps the flow of the state flow. Yeah.
Thank you.
Another question?
Hello, thank you for your presentation. It was really interesting. One of the question I have is about the feedback you had from Can I Play That? I think I don't really remember the name of the site. It was about in Sifu you have to press button in a precise timing, so it's part of the gameplay. And when the team or the game designer read about this feedback, did they react about it and think about how they could adapt their gameplay based on this feedback, that precise timing is not easy for certain type of player? So the question was about how they balance gameplay and accessibility. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, this is. I didn't really add my hand in the pure gameplay system, like the combat. That was mainly Theo Cassely and Jordan Layani, but they took notes about, of course, all the feedbacks they received from the launch and the playtest, and it took form in. Three main things. First, the student difficulty level, where enemy speed and build-up are more forgiving for the player. And also, like I said, there were 2 modifiers added later on that can help mitigate this issue with the enemy attack speed and the slow motion when you press guard, so you have time to react more properly. So yeah, that was the solution we proposed anyway. Any more questions?
I have. Thank you. I had a question on your slide with the mentioning all the accessibility features you wanted to implement. The top one was about flickering lights, and I remember in the game there's multiple corridors or scenes with high contrast and neon lights, like in the club, for example. How do you discuss with the art team, the art department, on focusing more on less light, less contrast for accessibility, or more lights for cinematic and mise en scène?
Yeah, so that was a warning I raised around mid-production from the game accessibility option website, and the art team took note of it and were careful about it, but they didn't want to boil down the experience, the stylish experience, and but in the end, I think it's on Switch. You have a precise requirement for that, with a flickering light every X time by second during X seconds. I don't have the numbers right now, but we were far below that, even with the effects we put on with fires and neons, mostly in the second level. So we considered it wasn't such an issue. It wasn't an issue, and with all our participants of playtest, we didn't have the issues with that, or epileptic people. It wasn't an issue. It seems.
Well, thank you very much for the presentation. Now it's time for our lunch break. We'll be back later. During this time, you can play in the main room of the school or student projects. So it's some are either like free, main available, and or smaller projects. So thank you very much, and we'll see you later.